Three Righteous Mamas is a podcast brought to you by The Signal that is on a mission to transform our country. We tell the stories that matter, celebrate the power and hope of pissed off mamas who are building a better future for all of our children. Hi, I'm Muna Husseini.
And I'm Christina Sensun Ramirez.
And I'm Martha Pinkoffs.
And we have Aimee Allison joining us today. But before we chat with her,
I'm curious. Tell me about who you were. Typecast yourself when you were younger. If you had to say, this is who I was in a movie, who would it be?
Like teenage years, you mean, not like
childhood. Yes, teenage years, of course. The best years of your life.
Okay, so I have to know, first off, were you all sullen teenagers?
I was not. I was like happy, pretty happy. Oh my God, although I was depressed as shit.
That's the opposite of happy. You go
well, the like what you saw. Yeah, what people saw was like totally happy-go-lucky kid.
And you weren't like bitchy to your mom or something?
I like cultivated a character that I still refer to as the Ice Queen. When I would get in trouble, I would just like call the Ice Queen forward, and like I wouldn't have any sort of reaction when I was in trouble. Like my parents would get angry with me for not turning in homework usually. And I just was like stone-faced. Like I could not be touched.
So what's your character?
I know.
Who's your like?
So my character, I saw for the first time this year. There is a TV show called Atypical, and there is.
I saw that.
Okay, so the sister.
You are not her.
I was her in high school. I was like, that is exactly who I was in high school.
But she's not like happy-go-lucky. She's actually like.
She's a little sullen.
She's sullen.
She's kind of funny.
Yeah, she's funny. She's sarcastic, but she's super sullen.
Really? Well, yeah. I saw that character, and I was like, holy shit! I have now seen myself.
If that's who you were. She's a little sullen, but she's like sporty.
Yeah.
What else do you have from her?
She's sporty. Well, she lived out like her high school story was what I wish that my high school story had been.
She realized she's gay later.
Yes. And she has like a crush on the cute girl, and then they hold hands. And I was like, oh my God, I wish that had been my high school story. But
her personality seems so different than yours right now. Cause I know we changed. Thank God we changed from our teenage years, to be clear. Thank God. But her core personality strikes me as very different than your general like energy, I guess.
Zippiness.
Yeah, like you're like, you're zippy, you're funny, and you're generally like happy and always give everybody the benefit of the doubt. You know, like that's you, and that is not that woman. I feel like you just found affinity, which just says we need more queer stories, and
it's
like,
true.
Her love life story.
It's true, but I found affinity. I think it was the sporty part and the love life part, and it was like, oh, so sweet. But yeah, you're right. I generally probably a little friendlier.
Yeah.
I think we all know that Muna was the A+ student.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was probably this annoying, always happy, nerdy, sporty kid. I don't know. I can't even think of like that combination of who it was in TV, though. I do remember watching Bend It Like Beckham. I think I was in college at the time, and it was one of the few movies I identified with because there was a girl who was into sports.
Yeah, she's so cute.
Didn't want her playing sports, and she like really had to struggle to like get out and like figure out not only her identity on the pitch, but also like as a person. And I remember that one scene where her sister is getting married and says like, don't you want this? And she goes, no, I want more. And I remember like, oh, like the clouds came out for me. And I was like, yes, me too. I want more than just getting married.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Christina?
Oh my God. I am, what my favorite film, my like favorite rom-com of all time is 10 Things I Hate About You. I am that girl, only Latina. in the movie 10 Things I Hate About You. I remember, okay, here's a funny story. So I remember freshman year, there was this boy I liked, and he asked me to prom. And do you know what my answer was?
What?
I think I answered, and I was glad he asked me, but I answered, I don't attend superficial heterosexual events. And he goes, you're a bitch. And inside, my little heart was sad because I wanted to go with him, but that was my immediate answer. So
I don't even know how to respond to that.
I still remember like clearly in my brain sitting at it with him in that like flex period where you were supposed to study and him asking me, and then me turning around and being like righteous, but also kind of sad at how stupid I was.
Oh my God, it's hard to be a teenager. I'm so glad that I'm not a teenager anymore.
Yeah.
Oh.
I know. Sometimes, you know, because I've worked a lot with younger people, and we're living in a moment when people are very like, the thing I have learned most, I actually got asked this recently during an interview for something about how I've most changed from when I was young. And I think the thing that most changes is that like things are black or white. And when you get older, you're like, oh, well, things are kind of gray and complicated, and people are complicated. And when my teenage self, things were black or white, and it set, you know, it gave me righteous purpose, but it also blinded me and took a lot of experiences away from me because I was just like this way or that way, and there was no in between.
Yeah. When I was a teenager, I lived in the form that I thought would be most pleasing to everybody else because I was so scared of who I was. And I just knew that I wasn't brave enough to have been it. So maybe that's what I love so much about Casey from Atypical, is that she was brave enough to like be the version of me that I wish that I could have been in high school, because I would have been less pleasing and I would have been more like a little bit more black and white actually, and not beige, because I was some beige.
Yeah, but you know, I think when you're young, like I said, thank God we're not the same people we were in high school. I wonder if we would have been friends in high school. Probably I would have been like, you're not black or white enough for me. Pick a side, lady. Don't stay in the middle.
Just a little jock.
My middle school and high school were so snotty. Like you could just walk down the hallway and no one would make eye contact with you. Like there'd be people that, I don't know, like I was on the sports team with, and we would go to practice together and sit on the bus together, and then, you know, just see each other in the hallways and just, you don't even exist. And that was just how it was. Right. And I wonder, would we have been friends? I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like I was super judgmental and like self-righteous, as I said.
Do you know who you would have been friends with? You would have been friends with my wife for sure.
Oh, she was like that?
Because she was queer enough and like pretty radical.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You know what I think about it is like I like now that like my older self is not really that judgmental. Like I laugh at myself sometimes when I read stuff that I wrote and I'm like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing that I thought like this. But it was also for someone that's a young people, because I think when you're young, you obsess with like fitting in, you obsess with like being liked or accepted. And I made a decision that like, I didn't really like who I was because my school was super snotty too, Muna, when that was how you had to fit in. And I just decided that I wanted to like myself more than other people liked me. And it was so really lonely, but I really liked myself.
But that's really smart. I mean, that is smart. Yeah.
Maybe we should do a movie where we all meet in high school. We go back and like back in time.
Fun.
Well, I think that, you know, in middle school, people are struggling to find themselves, and you have to act like you've got everything together, even when you don't.
It's so obvious.
And then as you move into high school, you start to find your tribe. And then hopefully, if you don't find it in high school, that happens in the years after high school. And ultimately, you find your people because you're looking for them, but also they're looking for you. And nobody has it figured out. And I talked to Misha about this a lot, where, you know, yes, middle school sucks, but it gets better. You just have to hang on. It gets better. And that's why representation matters so much, because when you can see yourself, whether it's on TV or in books, and your point of view represented even in politics and policy, like that gives you hope for a better future. And so super excited that we're talking to Aimee Allison next about representation and why it matters. So let's chat with her, y'all.
So we are so excited to have Aimee Allison with us. She is the founder and president of She the People, a national network elevating the voice and power of women of color. She brings together voters, organizers, and elected leaders in a movement grounded in values, love, justice, belonging, and democracy. In 2018, Miss Allison was one of the primary architects of the Year of Women of Color in Politics. In April 2019, she convened the first presidential forum for women of color, reaching a quarter of the American population. She is building a political home for 1 million women of color, nationally and in battleground states. We are so excited to have you with us.
Yay! Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And we always ask our guests, since we are the three righteous mamas, about your own mother or a maternal figure that shaped you to become the powerhouse that you are.
It's such an open question. Hardly anyone, this is the first time since founding She the People, anyone's asked about my mother. My mom was raised in Eastern Oregon in an all-white town called Sweet Home, very little town. And her dad owned the insurance agency in town and was also a local elected official. And when she was 17, she saw really young and, as she says, really courageous protesters about her same age getting shot by water hoses in the South. And she was one of hundreds who got on a bus, white kids from all over, college age, high school age, and went south. She went to Southampton, Virginia. And the reason that they went was ostensibly to register Black voters in a time it was very difficult for Black voters to vote. But what she said was what actually happened. They stayed with civil families that were involved in the civil rights movement, not famous people, regular people with kids, just moms and dads. And they went to church. She had never really grown up in the church, but certainly never gone to the Black church. And the experience started to change her. She was in Southampton, Virginia, with organizers, Black and white, when the Voting Rights Act bill was signed. And she tells me all those years later that was the time where she felt like she was part of making history, part of making this country better. A couple years later, she went back, married her high school sweetheart, had twins, and then they divorced. The twins were only 2 years old, and she went to Oregon State. My dad was a PhD candidate in a field there weren't very many Black students, and they met and had me. And so I would say I was my mom was unwilling to accept the role that she was assigned and the limits in terms of imagining how what it was that she was supposed to do in the world. And she went beyond that. And I am in many ways an extension of her greatest hope for the country. That is, people coming together across race, people, fighting for democracy, fighting for people's dignity. And, she's in her 70s now. She, even though she came from an all-white town, lives in this multiracial world now, including her children, and, says, I'm her greatest legacy, me and my 5 brothers and sisters. So that's my mom, Jennifer.
And her full name, we always love to shout out the moms. We interviewed Paula Ramos, Jorge Ramos' daughter, and we asked her about her mom. She said, no one ever asked me about my mom. They only asked me about my dad. So to honor her, Jennifer, her full name.
Jennifer Parker Westerman. That's beautiful. I love it, especially being biracial and because of the way that race works and Blackness being so potent. They always say we round up. So, if you have one Black parent, you're Black, and and part of the reason that She the People is so meaningful is for those of us who come from a multiracial background. It's really important to honor my mom and my dad because they both contributed to my sense of possibility in the world.
I love that sense of possibility in the world. Like that, as a parent, seems to be the highest participation in my kid's life, is to give them a sense of their possibility in the world, not put it on them. What a beautiful thing. Aimee, I'm curious about how you wound up in politics, and you started She the People. I would love for you to tell our listeners more about She the People and what provoked you to start She the People.
How I started in politics is a difficult question to answer. It should be easier, having spent, really 35 years around politics, different roles, both in media and
it sounds like, Aimee, you started when you were 5 then?
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
Every one of you is younger than me. I'm in my 50s. I'm just like, wow. Boom.
Awesome.
My son's 24. I don't even, y'all got, I know, Christina, you have a little one. I know you have little ones. But I really think my entree into politics started pretty young. I wanted to go to college, couldn't afford college. The military recruiter on my high school campus convinced me to join, to pay for school. Now they tell me all the fine print, which is that it doesn't pay for school and it limits a lot of options. And, I signed up to be an Army medic, rolled up into Fort Jackson, South Carolina, my first time in the South. And if you ever been out there, it's like red sand. And there was this like bus full of girls. I was 17, this girls.
Oh my gosh.
And this red face, kind of redneck drill sergeant gets on the bus and starts screaming at us. I was terrified. I didn't even know, this is how naive I was, that I was going to be carrying a gun, an M16 as a medic. I wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah.
So I think my politics was formed in a crucible of this like wanting to serve, this very diffuse, I want to serve humanity, and trying to fit into someone else's idea of what that meant, trying to hold my head upright in a very twisted institution where Black and brown people, especially women, were subjugated. You're not paid to think, you're paid to follow orders.
Right.
And my politics came out of finding a voice through that, saying I want to belong, but I don't want to be, this isn't my idea of that, and having to redefine that. And I'm saying that to say that then my politics, in all the different forms it's taken over the decades, became really an expression of, how do I uphold my own humanity and justice for other people? Like I am now attuned to that. I was in both my unit and my company when I was in the military, were girls with 17 to 35-year-olds. And most of the women came from poor areas, mostly from the South, mostly from small towns, mostly from poor or working class communities. And these are people with big dreams who didn't have a lot of choice, and certainly not the freedom that this country had promised. So my politics is around really working for that, not first for myself, but also for the people around me that I saw that deserve freedom and choice and humanity.
Mhm.
And so, many, many years later, I remember I started first She the People after working in politics in a number of roles. And I had decided I'd gone on this trip to Cuba with a group of 20 women, mostly were from corporate America, mostly from tech. A lot of these women were in their 60s and 70s. And when we were going around Cuba, it was this group called How Women Lead. And we were touring, kind of small businesses there, meeting a lot of women there. And in between, we were talking to each other and they really encouraged me. I said, I see the most important thing now that Trump has been elected, most important group of people to save this country are the people that are never acknowledged and are so powerful, courageous, brave, and brilliant, are so effective in bringing everyone up and bringing people together across race. And this group of people should be leading the country. And I was telling them this, and they said, you should go forth. And they really encouraged me to do that. And so I got back from Havana and I decided to hold the very first, what I call political summit for women of color in 2018. And that summit was incredibly beautiful, really spiritual, ascendant. Had intentionally more than 90% women of color, but the Muslim women with hijabs and the women under 25 and indigenous women and trans women and women who were born in other countries, all of us in our beauty and glory were expressly brought together, as in the room. And something really magical happened there that showed me what was possible when you expressly reach those who hadn't had a voice and hadn't been told anything other than that they were the leaders. And we said collectively, we're powerful and it's our time. And it was so successful. We started getting some national press and realized that this was a way to look at our country and our future that was both hopeful and different than the way that we'd understood our politics and who we were as women of color. And a week later, I went on this writing retreat. It's one that is for women. It's out in the mountain. You have your own cabin and you have your own little fireplace. And the only time you see the other 6 writers in this writing retreat is for dinner time for 1 hour. So I spent 10 days by myself, mostly in my own head. And I started thinking about my experience in the military, what that was like for me as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old, and who I am now. And, she the People is around faith. I never thought that politics was, I don't really think politics is just about party or anything like that. That was never that compelling. But politics about love and about, making justice the law of the land and creating a country where everyone belongs, that kind of politics I could get behind. And so that's what I've been working on. That's She the People, and we've been, I've only, we've only had an organization for a couple of years, a little over 2 years. And there's a lot more ahead, but at least we recognize now that our culture is recognizing who we are. And there's some space, a little bit of space to acknowledge our power and presence. And there's just more to do.
Absolutely. I think when you put that summit together, you created space, right? And you created that opening. And now here we are with Kamala in the White House, right? And representation for women of color matters, and the things we care about, and getting behind not necessarily party or partisan politics, but getting behind justice, getting behind love, and those sort of things really resonate for me. And, in my own house, Kamala's win is significantly special because my kids see someone that looks exactly like them, part Black, part Indian, in the highest country in our office. I was talking to my daughter because for the first time, you see those posters with like the little circles and all of the men in there. And now there's going to be a picture of someone and they can see themselves. And as much as I think that representation is important and representation matters, it goes much further than just our identities. And so, can you talk to us a little bit about why that representation matters? And ultimately, how does that translate in a different outcome from policy?
I've been thinking about this a lot. I still want to write a book about women of color in politics and answer these questions and explore the philosophical nature of all of this. But I did not start She the People only to elect women of color, because that to me is like a cul-de-sac. Because if you say, if it's an argument, it has to be more than that. It has to be elect a woman of color to do something for the country, to do something for the community. And so in that sense, we can't stop with identity. We have to go deeper and further, particularly because we're, certainly in Texas, here in my home state, California, and all over the place, there are communities and entire states that are majority. There's no majority anyone, and our identity and the way that we unite has to be as complex and intersectional as it will allow. So when I think of representation of politics, I actually think, okay, what's our real North Star? The next big idea for us is multiracial democracy. I always thought women of color would be the center of a coalition of civic actors, voters, organizers that included everyone, and that representation was along the way to multiracial democracy. And the fault lines are set. The people who were in the Capitol on January 6th, trying to overthrow the results of the November election, the people who are trying right now in the Georgia State House to make it more difficult for people to vote, and that's people of color. It just comes right down to it. These are people who do not want the country to move to multiracial democracy, and they do not want to see our communities represented in both have a equal voice and to be able to elect our leaders. So that's what we've got to work toward, and that's what we have to be very clear about. That's what our goal is. Having said that, though, there are I'm on the lookout for these courageous moral leaders that they stand out right now. I mean, look, you look at someone like Ted Cruz, your senator, and then you contrast his cowardly, sniveling retreat to Mexico in the midst of a huge crisis. And you look at the way that Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez out of New York, not Texas, out of New York, raises, I think now, has been a catalyst to raise $5 million. Mm-hmm. She's working with the Congresswoman, in Texas, is actually rolling up her sleeves and putting together, boxes and care packages for people who are suffering. That's courageous. That's bold. That's moral leadership. And we know it when we see it. And because so many women of color understand what ails us, what it is to be dehumanized, defiled, dismissed, sidelined, and have dedicated themselves to expanding love and humanity and cooperation and these deep values. That's what we need in this country, and we find it so often in the untapped excellence of women of color. So I can't imagine where we would be as a country without women of color. So representation for me, Matt, is because we're the least likely to group of citizens in this country to be elected. And yet, when we are elected, so many are bringing together people across race and fighting for justice, and not just for their narrow interests or their own, region, but for the entire country. So that to me is what is beautiful and promising about electing women of color. And I think that the thing is, we've had a lot of success. When you mentioned Kamala Harris, I mean, the people, we saw the way things were lining up between, it was looking like a Biden, looking at Sanders, and these are two older white men. And we said, okay, this cannot happen, because if we're going to beat Trump, we have to have us on the ticket. And so since very early last year, did polling and a lot of writing and a lot of big pushes and pressure in the media that ultimately, I think, made the case for women of color on the ticket. And she truly is a woman of color. This is the thing. And you can't flatten the story to say it's a Black woman on the ticket. You can't flatten the story to say it's an Indian woman on the ticket. It's both those things, but it's more than those things. And the significance of that is the nuance and of who we are and what we represent, and the fact that our identities uniquely qualify us for leadership in this moment. The whole country should be looking to us and following our lead. That's like the beautiful thing about people like Kamala Harris being, someone like her being in the White House. But if we think we're done, we're just not. We're just not. I anticipate, because we had success electing the Deb Hollands and the Rashida Tlaibs and the Ilhan Omars and Lauren Underwoods, all these amazing women of color, we're going to look at 2022 with people dedicated to voter suppression and to take away the representation that we have won. And there was just a study that came out 2 days ago that showed Kamala Harris, our vice president, out of all the attacks on elected officials, if you look at social media, has the lion's share, like 75%.
Wow.
This attacking our humanity, our qualification, like who we are, is the foundation for tearing down and our power and silencing us. I think we women of color have to be ready. I think those who believe in multicultural, multiracial democracy we need to shore up and be prepared to defend the representation that we've gotten and expand it.
I totally agree. And we can already see how Vice President Harris's perspective is pointed towards the suffering of all of the women who are out of work. And the recovery from the coronavirus is going to be fundamentally different because of who she is and the attention and empathy that she gives to the people that she governs. We are talking to you at like 7 days into an incredible disaster in the state of Texas, a disaster in leadership. Primarily, I think it is a disaster in leadership that our leaders were unprepared for the functional changes that the climate is reaping in our state. And I think that if our representation looked different in Texas and we have a chance to make that so in 2022, the response would have been different. The preparedness would have been different. And all of the suffering of all of the human suffering that our state is in right now would be really different. And I would love to hear from your perspective, like, how does a state like Texas, with incredible voter suppression and really committed tactics to make sure that we don't get everybody to vote. How do we start to overcome that with by electing women of color? How does that happen in a state like Texas?
I mean, the experts are right here, like
I
in
know.
this conversation, and it's I keep thinking, what would Senator Tsutsuna Ramirez do in the face of this disaster?
She wouldn't have gotten on a
wouldn't
plane.
have been going to Cancun, I'll tell you that.
I'm saying.
I mean,
that is a part of it, is allowing ourselves to say, what is the quality of leadership, and start saying who we need as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And to acknowledge that setting an intention like this, it sounds woo-woo until you realize the power. Women of color and powerful intentions about and do the work to back it up. And I've been through enough electoral cycles and working in states like Virginia, Georgia, Arizona, and with really excellent organizers in Texas. This hard year-round work of talking to people about issues that matter. This is a big one. I don't think anyone's going to be able to sweep this under the rug. No one's going to be able to justify it. And local organizers, and I don't have to say anything about Jolt because that excellent organization is doing such great work, but also Texas Organizing Project and others, working on the ground. I was just talking to Crystal Zermeño, who's the political director of TOP, and Crystal and I worked together. It's like when I did the presidential forum, I did it on purpose.
In Texas.
It's not like I knew people. I hadn't met you three yet. I didn't know a ton of people in Texas, but what I knew was Texas is about to flip. And when I say flip, I'm not talking about red to blue. I'm talking about non-voter to voter. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about, retro, like this reactive right wing to justice centered. I'm talking about multiracial democracy. I know that you're on the precipice in the state. And just like you, it does take more than one election cycle. Anyway, so when I was talking to Crystal, they're working with city council people in San Antonio. They've got their eye on some people in Dallas. You know what I'm saying? They're working on the ground. Yeah. They're talking about issues. Of course, everyone's going to be talking about this disaster, but all the issues about housing and unemployment and just the desperation and hunger and just all the issues that affect us in our communities are the issues that the organizers year round, who need to be fully funded in order to do that work, mm-hmm. To bring people in and to get them engaged in voting. We know what it took in Georgia. It took a lot of money, but it really took the excellence of organizers. Of course, everyone knows Stacey Abrams now, and she's rightly gotten credit for creating one of the institutions, New Georgia Project, that its purpose was to identify people of color who were eligible and unregistered, as well as defend people's right to vote. And they played an important role, as did Asian Americans Advancing Justice, mm-hmm. as did a number of other organizations. That's what it's going to take in Texas. So I look at this disaster capital. I mean, we're getting the news, probably a fraction of what's happening you're experiencing in Texas. And Texas is such a huge state. But the kernel of the transformation, or the seeds of transformation are already planted. You have organizations on the ground. You have excellent leaders in the pipeline. And I'm not just saying you, Christina. I'm talking about there's Jessica Cisneros, and there's tons. There's just so many amazing leaders, and you have the awareness. But at the same time, one of the women who works for Google is on my board, and Monica was saying that she went to McClellan, Texas, the last 5 months, and that's where she's from. So she moved from the South Bay there to be near her parents. And she said that in that area, the voter share for Latinos, Democrats lost about 20% of Latinos. And I think we need to be aware of the dynamic there and not make assumptions because people are, people of color or other things, they're going to necessarily vote for Democrats or be engaged in any particular way. So it's a war on many, many fronts. But I have so much faith. I think part of what we need to do is to make sure that money starts going to the right organizations, those right now, to do the work of organizing voters around issues in time for 2022.
Thank you for believing in Texas.
Yeah, we're very, very grateful for everyone. We say it almost every show that we believe Texas is the center of the universe. And that's not just because we're Texans, though partially because we're Texans. But if you change Texas, you change everything in this country.
For a long time.
You know the demographics of Texas really well. And our country overall is changing, right? By 2045, people of color will be the majority in the country. I personally think the diversity of our country is beautiful, especially here in Texas. And everyone, we've had different people look at the state of Texas and go, wow, there's a lot of people of color there. People have a view of Texas that's, I'm also mixed race, half white, half Mexican. A lot of people think of people like my white grandpa who wore his boots and his fringe jacket, great cowboy. And we have a lot of amazing cowboys, white cowboys and cowboys of all different colors. But actually, Texas is majority young, brown, Black, and urban. That's who Texas is. And as the state is getting ready to make this shift, and even nationally with the presidential races, how do we make sure that women of color are not taken for granted? I see a lot of times, like in the Senate race and for myself, people saying, yeah, we need Latinos to come out and vote. But we just don't think it's plausible for women of color to win. Right. So like the expectation that our community is going to show up and vote, yet they don't actually need to see candidates that represent them or understand what they go through to get out. Like the viability question for women of color candidates, you have to have had to beat back on that all the time. Like, how do you do that? How do we strategically do that so that it's not just our votes, but our voices that also get to be at the forefront?
I mean, we have to develop a severe allergy to anyone who tells us that we're not ready to lead now, and who tries to say that we have to wait our turn and that we're not viable or electable. If there's any lesson from 2020 is that you're not going to win without women of color. You're just not. We either stay home or we vote, but we're going to influence the election. And that women of color leaders are able to galvanize a multiracial coalition that other leaders haven't been able to. They could win statewide. And when we have fought this fight, I just, this is something that, I always say, like, women of color are most likely to face challenges in primaries. And I'm seeing this in real time in states that have Senate primaries coming, that like people are figuring out, like for example, in Ohio, there's an amazing leader in Ohio that's considering a Senate run. She's a Black woman. She's already holding office, a state leg office, and is being told by party leaders, hey, I wish, but no, step aside. But you can go ahead and help activate or talk to Black voters. And Ohio is one of those states with that they've tried to eliminate Sunday early voting, souls to the polls. There's all kinds of voter suppression. And I look at that and I think the playbook that got us, not just Trump, but the other terrible people that are in office that are working against our interests and working against democracy. That's the thinking. And that's not just Republicans, that's Democrats. And so, to your question, Christine, I believe we need to create a power base that is strong enough to support women of color in primaries who hold our justice agenda, to elevate their profile, and to hold them up and help them do what they do, which is to activate a multiracial group of voters and to victory. It may not be the first time, and this is the other thing that we need to be really good at is, and I ran for city council like 16 years ago, so it's not Senate, and it was, local and long time ago. And I lost by a few hundred votes. And I remember saying, I'm done with politics. I'm done. Because I put everything in and I lost. And there wasn't anyone in my life at that time to put their hand on my shoulder and say, you're important and we need you. The country needs you. But what's happening with the work that I'm doing is I'm putting my arm, like metaphor, whatever, figuratively on the shoulder of these women who run and don't make it that time. We need you. The country needs you. What do you need from us in order to demonstrate and expand your power? And I think that's the work that we're going to do state by state. The states I'm looking at right now, North Carolina, there's a woman of color considering a Senate run. I believe she could be the third Black woman senator in our country's history. We've got Pennsylvania. They're sidelining women of color that are considering the primaries there and in the Senate race. So it's not just a theoretical exercise. It is how we can build power, just like any other interest group. If you think about like white voters and how the country's political establishment and political parties understand white voters. Think about like the evangelicals. How many studies have been done about evangelicals and what they think and how they vote and who they back? And I want that, but for women of color. And I want women of color to be recognized as the progressive driver in not only states like Texas but just nationally. And we're not there yet because we're building. We need institutions. We need dollars. We need to support our leaders. We need to the women of color that we have in office. We have to protect them too, and elevate them. So there's a lot of work for us to do. Certainly more than one organization, but I see that power building as essential for us to be able to say, talk to the hand. If you're going to say I'm not electable, go over there. You don't know how to win. And actually, if you're in the Democratic Party and you're in Texas, you actually don't know how to win. Because you had Beto O'Rourke, who's a white dude, and you had all the money in the world and you still didn't win. And I want to know why. And so calling these, I sound real sharp right now, but like calling these the political establishment and consultants and donors to account. If you don't win, then give us a try. Because you've tried, and I think we did that in Georgia. Yeah, we're doing that, and we did that in Arizona, where, by the way, these amazing women of color led to flipping that state. We can do it in Texas.
Well, I'm really glad to hear when you ran and you lost, you were down, but you weren't out, and you've continued to work. You've continued to come back and support folks, and I will say, I think back in 2019, I attended. There was a summit on race hosted at the UT's LBJ school. And I was in a session actually listening to our own Christina along with Brittany Packnett. And I was in the audience, and, maybe for me, being a child of immigrants, I was blown away listening to Brittany talking about growing up in the church in this community, this wellspring of love and hope and strength that she had, and wisdom that she had to pull from. And I felt like I was at a loss because I don't have those deep wells to pull from. And as I'm listening to you talking, I'm listening to the strength and resilience that you have, and it makes me think about what Brittany was talking about, and that strength of the Black community. And it's like a tradition that's been cultivated over time. Earlier you talked about your mother being introduced to the Black church. Is this something, is your community and this tradition something that you've pulled from and has informed the organizing and work you're doing?
I mean, I grew up in the AME church, African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I did go with my dad and sang in the choir, taught Sunday school. You know, the idea of service, serving humanity, started there. So in that way, I mean, often I hear people talk about the Black church as it's more than a spiritual center. It's it's the wellspring for inspiration for a lot of the work in the world, and that's certainly true with me. It's interesting because like my partner now, who's a philosopher, he's a philosopher and he studies democracy and race, and his name's David Kim, born in Seoul, considers himself a steward of the Black tradition, the Black freedom tradition. And so in that sense, that freedom tradition is available to all of us, and it's not limited to people who grew up in the church. People can claim that legacy and tradition and that model of organizing, grounding in a sense of love, but also responsibility for other people, for fellow human beings. And so I see that as a very powerful grounding from organizing in my own life. And I also know that the Black church has limits. I want to be honest, patriarchal. And we have to tell the truth as women about the institutions that were built. My experience with the Black church was, women did the work, but the guys were in the pulpit. And I always would look for ways to find women's voice to light the spiritual path. But that was always an effort. So I'm finding my people. And while the AME church is a very important part of my early life, finding my people is much more broad than looking within a church institution. I want to find bridge people. I just made up that term, and then I'm gonna someday write more about what that is for me. But basically, people who have a heart for those who are different from them, and they figure out how to connect individuals or people, or and when it happens, it's such a miracle given the history and the reality of living in this country. So you asked me about the Black church, and I'm talking about a broader, a beloved community that includes different races and different religions. I deeply believe that those are who my people are now.
Well, we love that concept of not only beloved community, but lifting up others. I think that's building the world for all of our children, right? And it's obvious in the work you're doing, you're lifting up others and you're inviting folks to the table and making that space. And you mentioned a little bit of this earlier around the organizing done in support of Kamala, right? And her place on the ticket. I know that when Stacey Abrams ran, you quote unquote got information and supported her. You hosted fundraisers, I know, for Christina and building coalition of support for women of color. I'm curious how you arrived at this goal of building power for women of color. And, what do you want to accomplish long term, right? If you're playing chess, what are you building towards, Aimee?
Okay. I'm just going to throw it out. Some people are like, hey, you're a big thinker. That's okay. We'll just, you have to imagine, you have to have faith in a world you have not yet seen. So my big idea is to create, when I say that the big idea of the next decade is multiracial democracy, just like the big idea this last decade has been Black Lives Matter. That was so simple yet profound, shaping everything around our understanding, to the point where these victims of anti-Asian American violence in my hometown and other places are drawing together multiracial groups of people in solidarity, inspired and fueled by Black Lives Matter. I'm telling you that the next big idea of multiracial democracy is that's the big play. Women of color, when I say I'm looking for our people, women of color who know how to come together, knit together strong coalitions, speak to each other, support the humanity of other people, organize together, uplift each other, are showing the country how it's done. Like I come from Oakland, home of, Alicia Garza, and like there's a whole like long tradition of people who are bridge builders that I can draw on and adopt be in the legacy of. But when I went to a place like Houston, the conversations around organizing in Houston were around what we need to have rooms like this. This is the thing we have been waiting for, is to intentionally cultivate multiracial groups of women to as a core for transforming our country. And I look at that and say, okay, that's not just happening in Houston or Oakland. That's happening in Boston or New York or Phoenix or Miami. And when you recognize that we have such amazing potential to activate, that's the play. When I say like I want power, maybe I don't want you to misunderstand. It's not power to lord over or to take from or to oppress. Like the power I want is power to see justice realized. Like
power to share, power to transform lives, right?
Yeah. And it's also power to create an identity that is bigger than race.
Mm-hmm.
And because when I say women of color, some people are like, well, BIPOC or, whatever your word. I don't like BIPOC because it kind of erases some groups of people. I don't like whatever. For women, the term women of color is not meant to be a racial identity. It's not. It's a political term of solidarity. So building power based on that core of solidarity in which all of us here, we have common cause and we work in concert with and get things done together. Because when you're in a place like Texas or like California, where there's no majority, you can't have, neo-fascist, neoliberals peeling off parts of our community in service to white supremacy without having a center of gravity or a place for people to go.
Yeah. I mean,
that's the work.
I see so much of your work has been about lifting up the power and voice of those that are most frequently discounted by those in power to actually make our country fulfill its promise, its long promise to guarantee all people's the same rights and opportunities. And that includes white folks, right? That includes folks that have been harmed, whether they're white working class or poor folks in the third ward of Houston that had their pipes burst and didn't have electricity for 3 days. Like, that's all of us together. It's just centering the power source in a different place. That power source of change that's going to drive it and actually make sure it's more encompassing. Sometimes when we talk about this, in this country, it can seem so far off and far-fetched, like here's my big idea, right? And if you look at other countries, this is not such a radical construct or idea, especially like when you look at just gender parity and representative power. Muna's family's from India, mine's from Mexico. There are more women in power in Mexico and India as countries that this country sometimes looks down upon as thinking that our culture and community also are more sexist, and right since to say that there isn't sexism, but there are more women in elective office and representing and holding power and wielding it in Mexico and in India than in the US Congress. So, just like, I wanted you to just give us kind of a snapshot and understanding of it doesn't have to be that unique in this country because it's not that unique in other places.
That's right. No, I think you've said it. And what we have to do is to have a new standard by which to judge the health of our country and the health of people and health of our democracy based on, it's time that we looked at and used other countries as models for where we're trying to go. And to be honest about, we had a promise of American democracy, but the promise wasn't made to anybody here. The promise was never made to us. And so we're creating new agreements, new promises, new possibilities. And we can look at the way that other countries, and just because it's a woman doesn't mean she's awesome. I mean, all of us know that's true. But we can also say, and I always say justice, someone with a justice agenda can lead in this country. Millions of people that believe in justice can prevail in this country. And it means setting new standards for ourselves. I think we are like in this country really seeing, I mean, look at what happened in Texas, the breakdown of infrastructure and this whole idea of trickle down and privatization and silencing large swaths of people and their right to vote. It just, all of that came to a head this week in Texas, but it's also really speaking to the end of a bad old era and the beginning of a new era the potential of beginning a new era in this country. And it has to have, I think the country's going to rely on the hope, optimism, hard work, and brilliance of women of color to take us through, because we can't rely on America first and America the Great and all that stuff doesn't really apply, because we're seeing things break down around us. But through that, women of color have been the most hopeful, pro-democratic force in this country. And by extension, because of the military might and influence that the US has had on the world. So there's so much reason to lean in deeply, invest in and support women of color, because if it can be done in other countries, it can be done here.
I think about generational, like a generational handover of power is like a baton pass, and the baton that we're going to pass leadership to, it's Generation Z. They're the most diverse group of kids that has ever existed in this country. They will also face down the biggest challenges, the existential challenges that we haven't yet cured. And in the short time between our moment right now of cultivation of leadership and power and the baton passed to them, what can we do to make sure that we set them up for success?
Are you all Gen Y?
I'm a Z.
I'm a millennial.
Millennial.
I'm X. I'm sorry. I'm Gen X.
I was like, how are you a Gen Y?
Z.
I'm like,
she could be the oldest Gen Z.
No, I am Generation X and proud.
I think I'm Generation X.
Were you born in 1980?
79.
You're X, but barely.
Right. Oh, no.
I'm on the other end of X. The reason I was asking that is because, our generation, Gen X, we were lucky enough to know a lot of people that were active in a really pivotal moment in history, which is expansion of voting rights and civil rights in this country, the civil rights era, right? That's our parents and other people in our life.
And AIDS crisis.
AIDS
crisis in our
right there.
zone. Yeah, we watched it.
Mm-hmm. So much happened in the 60s and 70s that set a stage for a 50-year sort of struggle over the expansion of rights and its kind of a countervailing pushback. Mm-hmm. What did I get from the older generation? At best, I got support, resources, uplift. Mm-hmm. At best, that generation said, now it's your turn. What do you think we should do? Mm-hmm. And, one of my mentors who's just died last year, Leonard McNeil, was one of those people. He was in Vietnam. He was in the Army. He was my, what you call military counselor when I started having deep moral concerns about being in the Army and ultimately became a conscious objector. He was he was there, just, he would call me, how you doing? And support me and take me to, he talked to me about local office, running for El Cerrito City Council. I'm telling you all this to say, if you understand what I'm saying, then that tells us what we need to do with Gen Z. With Gen Z, my commitment is to make sure that the 20-year-old women leaders have support, and that I am personally deeply listening to and supporting their vision of what needs to happen. If they ask me, how should we look at this? I can share, but I'm not going to lead. They're going to lead us. And that sense of that generation in particular, Gen Z, they're so ready. They're so
ready, and they're amazing.
They're amazing. So just like I look for the bridge people, the courageous moral leaders, how do I give people jobs? How do I knit together communities? How do I show support for their leadership? And that's what I think needs to happen. And then they'll do the rest. They're doing stuff on TikTok that has more influence and political resonance, and I can't access it because I don't understand it enough.
Right.
Don't laugh, Christina. I don't really know.
I'm only laughing because Martha every single week talks to me about TikTok,
and I'm like, TikTok.
Leave me alone.
It's brilliant.
Okay, Martha, you might be the oldest Gen Z here. I can't, or like Clubhouse or like other things that are happening, how they're going to organize, I won't have access to. I certainly won't be defining, but I can certainly follow. And it's a beautiful thing to know where we sit in handing off the torch. Because in something about the generation, like the decade of the 50s, that is beautiful, because you can both be fully yourself and manifest your own why you were born and what you were, what I mean? Like what you're here for. At the same time, start looking around to say, what legacy do I want to leave? And it's wonderful. So if you haven't reached the 50s yet, I'm telling you, it's all good. It's all good, because it allows us to see those young women and just be like, they're so beautiful. They're so powerful. What can I do to support them?
Aimee, for the folks that are not on YouTube, I'm sitting here in my car in the dark. My daughter's outside with a flashlight doing something. I don't know what she's doing, so I'm just going to ignore her. But, I've sat through a week without power. It came back on and then went back off. And listening to you talk, I actually feel really filled up. I feel hopeful. I'm reminded of why we do this, because I think we came together post-Trump, right? Latina mama, Muslim mama, queer mama, because while folks don't think we have that much in common, we're great friends, and we want to build that future for our children. And hearing you talk about women of color having power, it's not about color. It is about the solidarity, right, of those voices and what that power can do. And I'm thankful that you do this work, and thank you for coming and sharing it with us. I know I needed to hear this, because I'm sitting here also thinking about hope in the future and what Gen Z and the other generations are going to do. And I'm reminded of the opportunity and the possibility, and that like it's only up from here. And so I just wanted to express some gratitude for you to join us, and also before we let you go.
Thank you. That means a lot. It's like I'm really sorry what is happening. And if Texas or our country is going to have a new way, it's really dependent on you. And
and our representation matters.
100%. And when people say, well, I don't know, looking at you all don't look like you have anything in common, it's like, to me, I'm like, hey, I'm home. This is where I'm most comfortable. I've never been the kind of person that finds comfort in everybody being the same. It's like, how do we have a conversation that meets at the heart level with each other? And that's all that's really ever mattered to me. So thank you.
Well, thank you for spending your time with us. Thank you for your like tremendous work. And it's already changed this country. It really, really has. So thank you.
Thank you.
It was so nice to meet you. Thank you. What I want to say is that what I loved about the conversation with Aimee is I always think about this thread that connects our history to our future and the place that we inhabit in it. And we stand on, I think about the shoulders that we stand on, and I think about how do I want to use my body to deliver something different, to deliver something better. And I think, who knows what's between here and how we actually deliver the change. But I certainly want to offer my shoulders to the generation that comes, and how they are going to have something better than what we've got right now.
Yeah, for me, I guess I think a lot about like when I ran for Senate, and people would be like, some people would say like, if I just wanted to represent Latinos, for example, because I was Latina, and I would say, look, we already have a sitting senator that only wants to represent one gender, one income bracket, one race. And guess what? It's not working out so great. So like for me, I think of how important for me representative democracy. I will always vote for the candidate that I believe will deliver the greatest structural change to address people's real pain. And I think that representation matters because perspectives and lived experience oftentimes drive you to a different policy outcome, a different understanding of the problems that plague us, how they plague us, and how to change them. And so that's why I think it matters so, so much. And for our little people that are of this like incredibly diverse generation in this huge state, I pin so much like hope and I guess interest in them and like what they're capable of. And the last thing I just want to say is that I feel like all of the time that we three invest in our little people, Muna, you said it, I think, on one of our first episodes, and I think about it a lot. It's like the first school of a child is on his mother's lap. And like our kids are going to figure this out because of the time and energy and love that we're giving them. So that's what I'm thinking about right now.
Well, I wrote, this was the only thing I wrote down that she said, but I was really struck by this quote, and it speaks to me a lot about building the world for our children, is we need to have power, not to, lord it over people, but power to see justice realized. Mm-hmm. And in this moment, that means everything. Because there is no moving forward without realizing justice and acknowledging the pain and wrongdoing, to then be able to move forward in a way that makes sense and be in solidarity, working towards common causes and moving in concert together to get the things done that matter. And if there's nothing else that Three Righteous Mamas is about, this is it. And so we'll hold space and put the intentions out there and then continue to do the work, because our kids need it. All of our kids.